Welcome to Destination Unknown, episode 16. I find myself in my old stomping grounds of New England in Nashua, New Hampshire with Richard Mori. Richard, welcome into the show.
Well, thank you. It's good to be
Yep.
here, Max.
Longtime bookseller, and I love the accent. I'm gonna enjoy the accent and talking to you all night long here.
You
Yeah,
mean you don't park your car at Harvard Yard?
I haven't done that in years, but I'm still gonna watch the Patriots on Sunday, believe me.
Good.
Yeah. And you also do run two book fairs in the New England area, which we will talk about. But so instead of me just giving an introduction, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself and how long you've been in the book business? Because I'm sure we have some great stories to tell.
So how many hours do we have here? I can
We can go as long as we need
no,
tonight.
no.
It's Friday. The weekend starts now, Richard. The weekend starts now.
Oh, okay. Well, it's I've been in the business 35 years. Um, I'm a I call myself today somewhat of an itinerant bookseller.
Mhm.
Um, I've actually been labeled by several different people as the road warrior because I do shows literally up and down the coast of the United States, from Maine to Florida, including Ohio,
Mhm.
and I've even done a trip out west or two. So I've traveled the countries buying and selling books. The it's just it's what I do.
35 years and counting.
35 years
Yeah.
and counting.
And what is your schedule like as someone who does shows? Are you on the road once a month, couple times a month? What is that schedule like?
It varies, but certainly 2 or 3 times a month is not unusual. On occasion, I'll have like 4 shows in a row, one week right after the other. But I also try to give myself a break. I'm a
Mhm.
golfer. I like to golf. I like some downtime, um, and when I'm traveling, I buy books.
Right.
You know,
You can't stop yourself.
well, it's truthfully my problem is I stop and see my friends, and
Right.
they keep putting stuff in front of me.
Look what I found, and they want your opinion on it. I know.
Right.
So you've been doing it for 35 years as a bookseller. What got you into the business originally? What was that journey like for you?
Well, I call it my birthing story, Max.
Okay.
I started buying books when I was 12 years old. I had a paper route when I was 8. I had my own checkbook by the time I was 10. My parents were pretty liberal in terms of letting me handle my own money.
Hmm.
I didn't make big purchases, but when I went to go buy a bike, I talked with them about it. But otherwise, it was my money. And the first book I purchased was Boy Scouts in the White Mountains by Walter Eaton. You
Hmm.
probably know the book.
Yeah.
On the cover is this beautiful paste on photo, and that photo is 1 mile from where I lived.
Okay.
And so it captured me. I was a Boy Scout. I loved the mountains. And it spoke to me. And I bought that at a little store in downtown North Conway. And not too long after that, I convinced my dad to take me to Ray Hoole's auction in Center Conway, and Ray was the local auctioneer, a well-known guy.
Hmm.
And I think I was that little kid that sat in the front row and kept raising his hand. And I think Ray finally said, "I'm going to give this one to the kid," and he hammered it for me. And it was a 1928 AMC guide with
Okay.
and a little booklet called The Crystal Hills, and both of which I still own, um, along with the Walter Eaton book. And I've bought multiple copies of those books over the years, along with lots and lots of other things.
Yeah, I also know about you. You do specialize in Boy Scout
One of my
and ephemera and books and everything else under the sun on that niche.
Yeah, I started collecting when I was 12,
Hmm.
and before I was a bookseller, that was my primary focus in buying. In the early days, you may not remember quite back this far, but I used to buy books for 10 cents and 25 cents all the time.
Yeah.
And in the early '80s, those booksellers, you know what they did? They wanted to get $2 a book. Can you believe that they wanted that? I just couldn't believe it. I
Can
was
we get them back to that
infuriated.
price now? Can we get them back?
I was infuriated, man. I couldn't believe $2.
Yeah. I remember when I was a student, a college student in Boston, and I would peruse a lot of the smaller bookstores, and I remember marveling at the idea that they would sell paperbacks still for 50 cents, and you could
Yeah,
get two for $1. And those days, of course, are long gone. In Boston, anyways.
yeah.
But I have such fond memories of being a bibliophile, a young bibliophile in Massachusetts or New England, and just traveling to all the bookstores, um, you know, and looking back to see what has changed so much. The market has changed so much,
Oh,
but,
yeah.
but it's fun. It's fun to look back at it.
Oh, it is, and
Yeah.
it's and I say that the $2 tongue in cheek. Now, if I could buy a book for $2, I'd be happy
Yeah.
today. It's
So how did you go from collector of and lover of the mountains and the outdoors, and how did the realm of bookstore or bookseller come into play?
so in the late '80s, I had worked in a ski area in Vermont, and the
Okay.
spring was coming, and I was in management at the ski area, and I knew we weren't having a next season, and I could see, quite honestly, I saw a recession coming.
Mm.
I'd worked I'd worked in the labor market enough to understand what was going to happen in the late '80s, and literally one morning I woke up and I'm looking in the mirror and I started a conversation with myself face to face, and I said, Richard, what the are you going to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I am tired of working for other people. And I said, well, if you're not going to work for other people, who are you going to work for? Guess I'm going to have to work for myself. And I think this is an actual
Mhm.
conversation. And I said, well, if you're going to work for yourself, you better do what you love. What is it you love? And the first word was books.
Yeah.
I said, oh, I can think about books. So I had a friend who was a book scout. He befriended me, and I called Chris up and I said, Chris, I think I want to sell books. What do I need to do? I mean, I've been buying, not
Mhm.
selling. He
You were
says,
you
well,
were buying as a collector though all those years.
right,
Yeah.
different mindset,
Sure.
different
Yeah.
different mindset. I mean, to sidetrack just a little bit, what's the
Mhm.
difference between a dealer and a collector?
Yeah. One puts a price on it. One will never put a price on it.
Well, even a little more
Yeah.
basic. One is willing to let go, and the other
Yeah.
isn't.
Yeah.
You know, that's really same thing, but
Hmm.
it's about the letting go.
Yeah.
And so I said, what do I need to do? He says, you got books? I said, I got books. He says, okay, put them in the car, go to a flea market and sell them.
Okay.
So the obvious question is, what are you selling for? And so I said, what are you selling for? And he says, and this is the pearl, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Sell them. So
So
in the late '80s, we didn't
uh,
have computers. We didn't know where. So I go to the flea market.
you got to tell us which one because there's some
Okay.
famous ones. There's some
Well,
famous ones.
well, this is a little small market,
Okay.
Alton Bay, at the end of Lake Winnipesaukee.
Oh, don't.
It,
Okay.
it doesn't exist as a flea market anymore, but it was going on at this time. And I throw the tables up. I put the books out. I'm feeling proud, and I look around. Everybody else has got books,
Interesting. Yeah.
and they're selling them for 25 and 50 cents. Well, I'd already gone through this $2 thing a while ago,
Hmm.
and I realized I couldn't make a living at 25 and 50 cents. So I paid attention. I think he made like $60 that weekend. It was good, pocket change,
Yeah.
and found money. And so people said, well, do you have Stephen King? Do you have Daniel Steele? Do you have gardening books? Do you have cookbooks? Do you have? So I started processing that. And the next week when I went back, I threw my books up on the table. And then I went walking around
Okay.
and I bought those gardening books and cookbooks and Daniel Steele and Stephen King for 25 and 50 cents. And I put them on my table and I was putting $2, $3, and $5 on them. And my theory is if you can turn a quarter into a dollar any day of the week, you're a magician.
were, were you, because you had a collector's knowledge and a collector's eye early on, when you're at the flea market back then in the 80s, were you buying everything you could, or were you still being selective with a collector's eye?
I was still being selective because I was trying to buy the things people asked me,
Okay.
because I knew I couldn't buy everything.
Hmm.
And one, I didn't have the car to take it home. But
Right.
but the reality is, that was early on. The gift I have, and if I have a gift in this business, some people will say it's my mouth because I'm always talking. But the truth is, I think my real gift is I have a great recall capacity. In other words, if I've seen something once, I know I've seen it.
Right.
If I've owned it, I know I've owned it. If I bought it, I know I've bought it. And so when I go out shopping, I can say, "Oh, I had that," or "Oh, that's somebody asked me for this." I have that capacity. I don't call it magic. I don't call it a picture,
Right.
photographic memory. It's just I have this recall
Yeah.
thing.
And but if you're at the flea market in the 80s, which was still a gold mine if you were a book
Oh,
hunter, book collector,
yeah,
if you had seen, I don't know, Moby Dick done by Rockwell Kent, you still would have picked that out, knowing
probably
knowing it had
not in
value.
not in the first year or so.
Okay.
Um, so so the rest of the story with Chris. So after a few weeks of selling, I called Chris up and I said, "Chris, how do you tell a first edition?"
Mm.
He says Zemple. I said, "What's a Zemple?" And
You're asking all the right questions, though.
he says, "Here's the address. Order it." I
Okay.
order it. I mean, I'm asking the guy
Mhm.
for information. He gives it to me. I follow it.
Right.
So I get my Zemple and I start reading. This is how Harcourt and Brace does it. Oh, Harcourt and Brace had 3 or 4 different iterations. They're not just
Was this the little pocket edition that you put in your back pocket?
no. It was. Um, I've got it right here. I keep it handy. I just don't use it as much as I
Well, because
used to.
you
Well,
have all the knowledge now. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
okay.
Yep.
The one I got was actually the thinner blue one
Right.
originally.
Yeah.
This is a newer edition with more information. Uh, but that's what I got, and I started reading it. I didn't necessarily read it from cover to cover, but when I got a book in my hand, and it was said Scribner on it. Well, how does Scribner identify a
Sure.
first edition? I learned
Right.
about the A, and when you learn about the A, then you start learning the exceptions. I've talked to a lot of people about book collecting over the years, just like you,
Hmm.
and I do this with all my customers and anybody I start a conversation with. There are 2 rules in the book business you have to memorize. All right. All other rules don't matter. These 2 rules are the most important rules. Rule number 1, for every rule, there's an exception.
Hmm.
Rule number 2, should you get confused, refer to rule number 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
It is true. It is true with
yeah,
books. It is true.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, you saw how thick that Zemple is.
Right.
Nobody's going to memorize
Right.
that book, but you can learn the patterns.
Yeah. And of course, with Scribner's and the letter A, it gets easier the more times you find these books, these
Right.
publishers, you recognize the publishers. So, but did that hurt you at all? You're learning first editions early on. You're a book
Yeah.
collector, but now you're becoming a bookseller. And I would probably say that maybe learning about first editions may be a different path to go, because I would like to say subject matter is probably more important than first edition.
In general, true.
Yeah.
You know, except unless you're talking about grapes of wrath.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, if you go to the flea market and there's a first edition Old Man and the Sea, you want to find the letter A, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But here's the reality of this. When the most important thing about book collecting for me is it really doesn't matter what I'm selling. And I've become a generalist. I didn't necessarily start out that way because I had I mean, I knew something about the White Mountain books because I bought them. I knew something about Boy Scout books because I bought them. Everything else was new to me. right? Everything.
Hmm.
So I started discovering though that I liked all of it, and I liked the modern first, and I started learning about who the hot authors were. I started learning about which books of theirs you want to pay attention to and which books you don't care about, in terms of value and resale value. And then I started learning about some of these other things. I mean, some of the things like in drugs. I mean, then you start learning about homeopathy. Then you
Hmm.
start learning about the books that were published in the 1600s.
Right.
Then you learn about beer making books published in the 1600s. Then you learn about witchcraft books that were published in the
And
1700s.
this is what makes you a generalist, because
Right.
you keep learning and learning and
Yeah.
learning. And if you're getting witchcraft books, you automatically know maybe I should go to Salem and go book hunting in Salem.
Well, actually, that is the last place I go to look for.
They're already taken though.
Well, one, they're already taken, but two,
Yeah.
they're overpriced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're selling the ordinary for
Hmm.
extraordinary numbers down there,
Right.
and well, that's their market, and they're welcome to do that. Uh, they can get $40 or $50 for a book that I can't get $10 for,
Right. Right.
because they have that market.
Mhm.
But what I look for, those $10 books, I'm not as concerned about.
Right.
I'm looking for the books, that are really, really unusual.
Mhm.
Years ago, actually in Virginia, I bought a book and it was handwritten, paid $500 for it, handwritten in the 1700s.
Okay.
And I'm flipping through it, and it's a one of a kind piece, right?
Mhm.
And there's a section on witchcraft. You know, I ended up selling that book in Boston for several $1,000s. And the guy I sold it to was a friend of mine, and he ended up getting, I think, close to 10,000 for it because he knew where to go with it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's part of the knowledge too.
Yeah.
Knowing who the buyers are.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
now what was the lesson for me? Did I make money? I made money. Was
Mhm.
I happy? I was happy. But I now know I need to pay a little more attention to where I can sell things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the most important lessons is the peripheral vision as a young bookseller, as you broaden your range of how to buy and where to buy and who to sell to. I think your peripheral vision gets wider and wider.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
It, it,
So go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to, so after I got the samples, a couple months later, I called Chris up again and I said, how do I know what to price a book at? I mean, there's no internet, right? He says Mandeville. I said, what's a Mandeville? He said, here's the address, order it. Well, Mandeville, for those who won't know this, because most won't, was
Yes.
a book published every year, about this big. It was almost a
Mhm.
quarto, a good sized book. And basically, it was an accumulation of dealers' catalogs. And somebody
Right.
sat down and said, Ralph is selling this for 500. Jones is selling this for 600. Let's say 550, right?
Right.
And that's how, basically that's how it was
Mhm.
done in those days.
Yeah.
And those are my first two reference books.
And this was still in the late 80s, or were you now
This
in
is
the 90s? Okay.
still in the way. I mean, I
Yeah.
I had a fairly rapid ascent, in
Right.
terms of the business, partially because I maintained a part-time job while I was getting into the business. A lot of people have done that. I'm not the first. Um, but I really got into it and I wanted to do it full time. And gradually I just started, spending more and more time doing it, learning more, meeting more people, meeting dealers.
Hmm.
I started selling to dealers. I remember the first time it was in Newburyport, Massachusetts. I'm sure you've been there,
Hmm.
and doing a little antique show on the green. And I knew some of the people probably in the route, that do the flea markets and do the shows around New England. And I knew one of the guys there liked golf books, and I found a golf book for a couple bucks, and I ran it down to the other end of the aisle, and I sold it for 35. And I'm going, yes,
You're getting better at it now. Yep.
yes, yeah. It was,
So,
it's part of the career.
so back then, of course, flea markets, but you probably we nowadays we would have called you a book scout.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you were
Yeah.
book scouting, and what was the steps? I know you owned the store at one time. So what was the steps from being a book scout? When did you want to be a brick and mortar?
So in the process of moving around, I ran into a guy that owned a um, a building in Keene, New Hampshire that was empty, and he and a lawyer friend owned this building, and he wanted to put a flea market in there, and he says, "Will you run it for me?" And I knew some of the people in the flea market circuit, so I said, "Sure, I'll run a flea market. It can't be that complicated." And so we did that for a season. And I met a woman, June Kane, there. And June liked me, and she was an old timer at that point, been around 40 years or more. And I was a young kid. And she says to me, "You should go to Brimfield." And I said, "What's a Brimfield?"
Now everybody knows. Everybody knows.
Everybody knows.
But
I
but
should,
that makes sense.
yeah,
Back then, not everybody would have known.
yeah. So
Yeah.
she says to me, she says, "I set up with a couple of my girlfriends. I have a space at J&J's. I park my vehicle in the booth, and you can have the space between the nose of the vehicle and the edge of the aisle,
I'll take
which
it.
is which is a table width." She says,
Yeah.
"I'll give you a table in front of my van for free. You just come down and help me set up."
Okay.
So I help them set up Thursday night. We have wine and cheese afterwards, and we talk and get to know each other. So the next morning comes along, and in those days, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. The field opens up, and 2,000 people come running onto the field. I mean, and I don't mean walking. I do
Right.
mean
Yeah.
running. And at the end of the day, I'd done $1,000, and I said to her, "Where the hell do I sign up?"
Yeah.
And so I did. And I've been going to Brimfield ever since.
And okay, so this leads us down a couple rabbit holes. Brimfield then and Brimfield now. What is it like now for those people see it on TV? There's lots of TV shows that showcase it, but
Yeah. Oh,
what
yeah.
is it actually like to walk through the dirt fields and be there nowadays in
Well, the
2024?
the good news, all the fields quite aren't dirt anymore. They've had to put in some crushed rock because they've learned that those fields get a little muddy when it
Yeah.
rains. And after the couple times of having to rent a tractor to pull people's vans out of the mud, they've gotten wiser. But besides that, the primary difference is the business. And I was fortunate. I came in near what I call the end of a supercharged period.
Yeah.
The 70s, the 80s, the 90s. The antique business, the book business, it was the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I call it supercharged. And literally things would, if you had something good on your table, I promise you it was gone.
Right.
It didn't, it, there was people standing in line. I had a true story. Guy comes into my booth at Brimfield during that rush, first thing in the morning, picks up a book, turns the page, looks at it, puts it down on the table, walks away. Didn't like the price. He no sooner hit that book, no sooner hit the table, the guy behind him picks it up, looks at the price, hands me the money, okay, and walks. We don't even talk. He
Right.
just walks away, right? The guy's gone 10 feet, and he decides maybe he should come back and buy that book. He turns around, he goes back to the table, and he says, I quote, "Where is my book?" I said, "I sold it." "You couldn't have sold it." I said, "The guy in the red coat, go get
The guy behind you.
it." Yeah, he couldn't believe, but that's how it happened in those
Hmm.
days. You know, it if you had something on your table, I promise you it was gone.
Mhm. Is nowadays, because of the internet, which we'll get into deeper, things don't sell as quickly anymore.
Not always. You know, I I changed too. I mean, I was on what I call the Premier Field, which was used to be known as J&J's. It's
Okay.
now called Auction Acres. I knew the girls. The guy who started this whole thing at Brimfield, they've actually erected a bronze plaque up on the property now
Hmm.
with his face, and tells the story. But then his daughters ended up taking over the business, and so I knew them. And Jill and Judy, wonderful girls. And so I was on their field, and I'd met a couple people there, and one of my buddies I got to know, Kyle was an itinerant bookseller. I mean, an antique dealer. He actually worked for the Massachusetts Department of Taxation,
Okay.
sales tax people, and and but he loved to do the antique thing. He did it on. He used his vacation time to go to
Right.
Brimfield, and so Kyle and I looked around, and this is in the early 2000s, the art years, and we realized things are changing, and we figured we needed to move. So we moved down in what's now called, they call it Midway, and there was
Mhm.
an antique center there. And the first year we were on the field, or the first show, we were on the field, and we didn't like the field. And we approached the owner of Lori, who owned the building in the field, and they weren't using the porches. Now they got 100-foot long porch, a
Yeah.
100 feet. Nobody's on it, and it's 15 feet wide, overhang facing north. This is the
Perfect.
most perfect spot in the middle of town.
Let's get the tables and put the books out. Yeah.
So that's what we did. We convinced her to let her rent the space, and I've been on the porch over now over 20 years, 25 years, and it's ideal for me. I don't have to rent a tent. I'm north facing. I
Right.
have tops, so I'm weather protected.
Yeah. So 80s, you start book scouting. 90s, you're in Brimfield.
Yeah,
The market is now changing in the mid 90s.
yeah,
You and I heard the same words. We hear about this eBay thing. We're hearing about this Amazon thing.
yeah,
And I remember talking to book dealers back then, and many people saying, who would ever buy a book on the World Wide Web? That's what they would call it
yeah,
back.
yeah. So by the time this eBay concept came
Yeah.
along, and this other thing about Amazon. I
Mhm.
forget their name. I sometimes can't remember it. But by the time they came along, I actually was in a store location now.
Okay.
So I've moved to Amherst, New Hampshire. I've just signed a lease for 12 years, basically. And this little short guy, about 5'2", comes in, roly poly. His name's Roland. And Roland's 75 years old. And he's just retired from Digital Corporation, which is 3 miles down the road.
Okay.
And he says to me, Richard, he says, you're going to want to close your store. Now, this is 1993,
Okay.
94.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just whispers with eBay
It's
and
just
Amazon.
whispers,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
Roland says to me, Richard, you're going to close your store, get into a warehouse, you're going to hire people, and you're going to sell books to the world, and you're going to make millions of dollars. So for 2 months, he tells me this. He starts talking to me and sharing with me. Now, Roland was the brain trust for the Digital Corporation.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, he understood
He, he,
technology.
he not only understood it,
Yeah.
he helped create it.
Yeah.
Okay. He was the guy at Digital that said, guys, we need to start thinking this way. If we don't, and we got to start creating our technology to do he was the idea guy.
Okay.
He at age, this is Roland Brandywine. At age 17, he was an MD.
Okay.
Not an
Yeah.
exaggeration.
Yeah.
Absolute truth. He was a Doogie Howser before Doogie Howser. At 1960, he looks around and he says, computers is the future. He leaves the medical world and goes to computers. He saw it coming. And so he lays it out to me. So after 2 months, Roland, and I'm saying, yeah, because he's right. I could see it too. He knew in what the vision was and what it was going to be. So he comes in one day and he says, so Richard, are you going to do it? And I go, no. What are you? Idiot. He couldn't believe I'd say no. And I said, well, Roland, I believe every word you told me is not only true, but I think it's going to happen even bigger than what you say. I believe you. I believe 100% in what you're saying. But here's why. When I got into the book business, I vowed I'd never work for anybody again. If I hire people, I'm working for them.
Right.
Two, if I go to a warehouse, people aren't going to sell me books. Then they weren't prepared to sell books to warehouses because they didn't trust people in warehouses. I need to buy books and have a storefront. Buying books is my lifeblood. And three, I said, I will I will never work for anybody again. And if I don't own the portal, I'm working for somebody else.
Okay.
So I understood those
Mhm.
elements, right? But now, did I know everything? No, but I knew where my mind was and what I
Right.
wanted, and I've never regretted that decision. Um, quite honestly, I don't know. Do you remember um, Mike Seltzer?
No.
So Mike created what was known as Bibliofind. You
Okay.
remember
Yes.
after Interlock, we had
Mm-hmm.
Bibliofind.
Yeah.
Came out just as Abe was coming into the market. They almost hit almost identical
Right.
at the same time. Out of Canada, and Mike was out of Massachusetts. I gave Mike, and he will verify this. I gave Mike the idea at a book show in Boston that helped create Bibliofind. I gave him that idea.
Yeah. Now that you say this, this is probably the third or the fourth time in these interviews that his name has now popped up with some
Yeah,
of the people who've been selling books for a long time.
yeah.
Um, so
And
so you never got into selling books on Amazon or eBay ever. You
now,
let it all pass.
now, can I use the internet? Yes. Do I know how to use my phone as a computer? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do I manage my business with my phone, the computer? Yes. Do I sell online? No. Do I want to sell online? No.
Okay, so then explain to our audience, because this is going to be foreign to them.
Oh, of course it will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is it that you sell? How do you find your customer base? And how do you source nowadays? Because
So
2024 sourcing is completely different.
it is. Although for me, not so much. Here's the irony. Um, I buy online occasionally. Matter of fact, this week when I got back from Brimfield, I had two books I ordered before I left,
Okay.
that came in because quite honestly, I was doing a lookup on something and I realized there were a couple cheap copies online. And I said,
Mhm.
they ain't going to be there long. And I bought them. So I use them. I use
Okay.
that as a
Mhm.
resource. Not a lot of times, but when I see something cheap, I buy it. And they were bargain prices. It's a book I sell, I mean, I got probably three or four copies right now,
Right.
but it's okay.
Yeah.
So, and those inexpensive copies are no longer online. That's
Right.
that's what I do.
You own
The
the mark. You own the market on them now.
I do, and listen, I have done that before. I mean, I have actually at times, without selling online, I have controlled the price of books
Right.
online without even selling online because I had an eye to pick things up, and I've driven prices up on books,
Hmm.
you know, um, without without intending necessarily
Right.
to, but I know I'm doing that. Um, but the thing is, I do about 40 shows a year, give or
Okay.
take. So that puts me in a lot of places. I meet a lot of people. At Brimfield, I've been in the same location over 20 years, three times a year. That's 60 shows in case somebody can't do the math fast. And people bring me things. I
Right.
don't even
Okay.
have to shop. Now, I go out shopping some, and I have certain people I go see. I have people who save things for me. They meet them at other shows. Oh, I'm going to be at Brimfield. I'll save it for you. I mean, I have those kinds of things that happen to me. I've also gotten much more selective. I mean,
Right.
I'm I could scoop a lot more up. Um, one, I don't. I've never this, and this is a rule I have with myself, and I don't think other people understand the importance of this. This is really a basic rule for me. I don't need everything.
Mhm.
I never. I try to go out of my way not to be greedy, and I try to leave some fat on the bone
Mhm.
behind me
Right.
because one, I don't need it all. Two, there's plenty more. And three, I want other people to find things,
Yeah.
you know? So, the people who come along, at a book sale and they go like this, or they take a blanket and
Right.
throw it over everything, they don't get it. They
Right.
don't understand what they're doing.
Do you
Um,
still marvel at the idea, though? I always say this to my paper gold Patreon members. The books are everywhere.
everywhere.
I mean,
I,
it's Yeah, it's not hard to find books once you learn how to find books.
Yeah. The thing though, while in fact I can say books are everywhere because I have bought books out of furniture stores.
Mhm.
You know they
Yeah,
have books, on
yeah,
display. But I don't buy every book there.
right.
I'm buying one book.
Right. They don't know that that one book that you
Yeah,
know about
yeah,
is on the shelf and you're yeah.
yeah.
I've done that before. I've done it.
You
Yeah.
know now now what's important here, I think, to understand. You and I are talking. You and I've been around. We know
Mhm.
it. For us, it's easy. I mean, I literally I go out with my girlfriend. We go someplace, and I find a book, and it pays for my day.
Mhm.
Pays for the motel, it pays
Right.
for the meal. You know, to me, it's just a natural thing to do. And
It's a lifestyle.
it's a
Yeah.
lifestyle.
And
And
you know the value of books, and
yeah,
those books can be a very easy key to to making money.
but hear me. A lot of people think you and I, we make it look easy.
Right.
And, and it's not that easy. First, I remind people, I've been buying books since I was 12 years old. I'm 74. That's
Right.
72 years. How many millions of books do you think I've looked at in my
Yeah.
lifetime?
Hmm.
Okay. It's in the tens of millions,
Right.
tens and tens of millions, could be even 50 million books that I have physically laid my eyes on or touched with my hands. I'm not talking about looking in a
Right.
bookstore and saying there's 100,000 books I've looked at. I'm talking about walking down the
Sure.
aisle, looking at the books, handling them, touching them,
Mhm.
buying some of them, finding out when I get home there was a page missing here, the title page wasn't there, all the images had been clipped out. Those are the mistakes we make.
Right.
But you
But I
you
think we
got to
all,
do that.
yeah, we do get better. We know what to look for. The more times you get eyes on books, the better bookseller or book hunter you do become because you learn what to buy and you know what stands out.
The people I mentor, one of my sayings, if you're not making mistakes buying books, you know what I'm
Right.
going to say,
Yeah.
you haven't bought enough books.
Right. Yeah.
You got to make the mistakes. You can't learn it by reading about it or you telling somebody about it.
Right.
They have to physically make those mistakes. Now, when I make a mistake, it's usually today I I try not to, but if I'm making a mistake, it's on a minor book in
Hmm.
terms of cost. So if it's a $10 book and I make a mistake, it's no big deal.
Right.
All right. Now, when I'm spending $100 for a book, I take a little more time and a little more attention, and I make sure that the title page is there,
Right.
and that if there's supposed to be 10 plates, there are 10 plates, and that there's no foxing at the back of the book that I didn't see about, or that there'd been a leak on the back of the book on the spine, and
Right.
these are the things you have to pay attention.
Yeah.
So, when you're spending dollars, you got to pay attention. But inexpensive books, I don't spend a lot of time looking at them. I just buy them, and if I've made a mistake, I've done. I factor that in. You, you know this, big picture. When you think small, that's where your head's at.
Right.
You got to think big picture. So a mistake doesn't matter most of the time.
And I hope I keep making some mistakes because it makes me
Oh,
better. Yeah.
oh yeah, it's gonna
So
have to.
so where do you house your collection? Because you're doing book shows, they have to stop at a certain point. You have to have rest in
So,
between.
I had a store in Amherst, 5,000 square feet. Um, when I closed that store, I sold a lot of it off, got rid of it, put some in storage, but I moved a bunch of with me. Um, the Today, I've been through several storage um, circumstances, situations. Today, I'm in 4,600 square feet.
Okay.
I keep everything on pallets. I can move this warehouse
If
in
they have to.
one.
Sure.
If I have to move this warehouse, I can physically move this warehouse in less than 3 weeks.
Yeah, and without giving it, you don't have to give the exact number, but in New Hampshire, what is warehouse space? How is the cost of that nowadays?
It's gone up. You know, I mean, it's higher than it used to be, but it's still relatively reasonable. I think I'm at around $6 a square,
Okay.
which is still reasonable.
Hmm.
And when I first had a storefront, I was at $3 a square.
Yeah.
When
Okay.
I had a storefront, not a warehouse.
Right. Right.
In those days, a warehouse was probably around $1 a square.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, it's changed. And
yeah.
how are you keeping track of all of your volumes for sale?
Oh,
You
interesting
you
question.
don't you don't
Do
do
you,
a
do you,
you don't do a catalog anymore, do you?
I've never done a
You've never
catalog.
done a catalog. Okay.
Never done a catalog. And never done a database.
Okay.
It sounded like a lot of work to me.
So how do you keep track? How do you know if someone wants that butterfly book that you have,
Yeah,
Butterflies of South America, how
they're,
do you know?
we're both going to hope and pray that I have the ability to find the box that I put it in. Although what I am doing, I moved into this warehouse a year and a half ago. Um, I now have I've been in situations that are a little more jammed. So I now have access to every pallet, meaning that
Mhm.
I can physically touch a pallet and go through the boxes in that pallet, any
Okay.
one of them at any time. So that was an important step for me. I have put up some bookshelves. I do unbox books at time, but here's the reality for me. Every time I unbox a book, unbox a box of books, do you
Yep.
know what I'm doing? I'm rediscovering
Yeah.
my buys from times past. So, it ends up coming into, some of them will go into the show circuit with me. Some of them go on the shelf. And then when somebody says, "Do you have so and so or such and such?" I can say, I just unboxed that last week. Let me drop me an email and I'll send you a picture.
Okay. So I'm gonna play a different role here for a second.
Yeah.
When you go to a book show, how many books do you take into a typical book show?
Typically, I take approximately 40 to 45 boxes of books, which is
That's a lot of
it's a lot of
books.
books.
Yeah.
Well, can you consider that I'm probably in the 25 books per box
Uh-huh.
range, maybe a little more. With
Yeah.
children's books, it's more because I
Right.
do a lot of children's books. So there's probably 40 or 50 books in those boxes.
Hmm.
But I'm averaging probably 30, 35 books a box average. So do the math, that's almost 1,000 books,
Yeah.
you know. And um, and some people, I'm not the only one who carries it. Several of my friends carry as much or more inventory than I do.
Right.
But the
But
thing is,
that is a lot of work.
it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I've learned how to economize my time and effort.
Hmm.
Um, I have wooden boxes for a lot of them, not everything, but as a matter of
Right.
fact, I just bought some new wooden boxes. I had a friend of mine make them for me, and he made me some beautiful, beautiful boxes. I'm real pleased with. Um, and so I can set the boxes up and stack them on top of each other. So
Okay.
it's not a question of unloading, putting
Hmm.
them on the shelf, and then repacking them. I just take the box down, and
Right.
then I pack a few books in around it to keep the box tight, and I stack the boxes on top of each other, and haul them to the vehicle. So that's it. I can literally do a breakdown in 2 hours if I want
Hmm.
to, which is relatively quick in a show. Even people who don't bring half what I bring will spend 2 hours getting out of a lot of shows.
Yeah. And a typical show for you is a Saturday and Sunday, or are you doing
Typical.
sometimes the longer ones?
I do. I've done 3 day shows. I've done Brimfield's the 6 day show.
Right. Right.
So I do that. I've done 2 shows in one weekend. There are times where I've done that, but I like the 2 and 3 day shows. It I see more people, a little more relaxing, and the boxes are heavy.
Yeah. Yes, they are.
They're running 35, 40 pounds
Hmm.
average. You know, I literally carry 2,000 pounds of books. That's no exaggeration.
Please tell me you're using a dolly. Please tell me you got
Oh,
a.
wheels. I love
Yeah.
wheels.
Okay.
Anything with wheels. And truthfully, I had to tell you, I'm very I think the word is ergonomics.
Hmm. Very
I'm very,
efficient. Yep.
I try to be very, I do very limited movement and lifting. Um, and I manage that well.
Mhm.
And I actually, since I was a kid, I've always had a back that I had to be careful of. And I'm still going okay, because I pay attention to what
Mhm.
I'm doing.
All right. So now I know this. You also run book shows.
I do,
So yeah, tell us about the two shows you run. I know one of them's in Boston.
yeah. So I'll tell you about the Concord show first.
Yep.
I bought a show from Marvin Getman a few years ago. The Concord show has always been a favorite of mine. One time we used to have two shows in Concord, and then it went down to one. I didn't want to see it end. He was gonna dump the show one way or the other, and so I stepped in and I took it over. Um, it's always been a great show for buying. And one of the real beauties of that show is that there are a number of dealers who only do that show
Okay. So they're
and
bringing all their best stuff.
all their best stuff, and they've
Mhm.
saved for a year.
Yeah.
And many of them had shops, but this was inventory that probably never even hit the shop shelf,
Right.
you know. And so they were my general theory early on in the years ago in the show. If I didn't spend $2,000 at that show, I had a bad show.
Okay.
That was my form of measurement because the
Mhm.
buying was so good there. And then last year, a friend of mine, Dwayne Stevens, and I had the opportunity to take over the Boston Shadow Show. Now, I personally had done that show right from the beginning when
Mhm.
Bernice Bornstein had it. Bernice had it in the garage basement of a parking garage at the back
Okay.
of the Heinz Auditorium, and literally her husband owned the building. He would kick out the monthly rentals for the weekend, and we would take over the basement of that shop. Like, it was like a 10-story parking
Mhm.
garage, and we loved it. Oh, it was fantastic. So that show's gone through several iridations, and Bernice moved it to a hotel, and then the castle, and then it was sold, and it had several other people. Dwayne and I took over last year. We Dwayne, God bless that guy. He found a space on Dalton Street, which is the original street that the original show was on, a block from that parking garage, at a hotel that nobody in the world had ever paid attention to. And they had this beautiful space on the second floor that we could do now doing a show in. And people love it. And it's on the doorsteps of the Heinz. It's a 3-minute walk to the ABAA floor. Unbelievable. And nobody's ever done a show there.
Is there now you're going to be biased like I am. Is there a better place to be a book lover than in New England?
I've traveled the country. The East Coast I know very, very well. And I've bought books every place I've gone, but I've always bought my best stuff in New England.
Yeah.
I mean, there is. I mean, I bought wonderful things in Ohio, and I bought
Right.
wonderful things in Georgia, but those are a few here and a few there.
Right.
In New England, it just keeps rolling, and
Yeah.
there's a reason for it. People
Mhm.
don't understand. There's a real reason for it.
Historically, sure.
Not only not just the history of the area,
Right.
but the history of printing. More importantly,
Yes.
the Boston market for 200 years basically controlled the technology of printing.
Of the day,
All
yes.
all the
Yeah.
great advancements, the linotype machine, all the other things that happen in the printing world happened in New England
Right.
first, for the most part. I mean, there always there's other places, but New England has just this huge bed of inventions and knowledge and experience, and the people who invested in books and in the printing industry in New England. So we have a wealth of resources here that aren't in other places. Plus, we don't have hurricanes, tornadoes, and very many floods, and those things and fires. We don't have big. So because of that, our environment
Right.
is better.
Yeah. Yeah. But and historically, being part of the original colonies and having that history, and you just
All of that.
the wealthy families had all those books, and
Yeah.
they're around. It's just it's amazing.
The first book published in the United States is published in Boston,
Yeah.
the Bay Song. You know,
So 2024, we're about to hit 2025. How do you envision the book business in the next, say, decade?
I am probably the most optimistic of anybody you're going to talk to about the book business. Because when I even came into the business in the late 80s, the gold timers were saying, "Oh, these kids today." Now, I'm a kid at that
Right.
point. I'm saying they don't care about books. The antique business is going down the drain. I was hearing this 40 years ago, going down the drain, da da da. Right? I look around today and I'm excited.
Yeah.
Kids love books. And here's the thing that I found most fascinating, and I'm hearing it 60% of, hear this number, 60% of my business today are with kids under 40.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Okay.
not strange. I've heard that from other booksellers who do book shows,
Yeah.
and they've been amazed at the even younger than that, the younger kids who are excited about the ephemera. And because
Oh,
they're digital kids, they've never touched these things before.
and here's, I saw this coming 15 years ago. I mean, I really did. 15 years ago, I was saying, people were saying to me, "What are you going to do when people are reading everything online and electronic
Right.
books and nobody's printing books anymore?" I, please,
Yeah.
kids love. And here's what's really happening, and a lot of people are just now starting to see. I've seen this for years. The kids who have grown up in this digital age, they're bored.
Yeah.
They're bored with the technology. You know what they're embracing? Textiles, vinyl, paper.
Yeah.
I'm telling. Those are the things these kids
Yeah.
love: textiles, vinyl, and
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah. Vinyl and paper right now is definitely a growing market, and I think it's about to explode
Yep.
once these teenagers and these 20 somethings work a little bit more, make a little bit more money, they're gonna be the next generation of collectors.
And that's exactly what I tell
Yeah.
people. I don't have as many big sales, but I have more small sales.
Hmm.
I'm still making good money.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
And I know that in 5 years, those people who are buying, and here's what I do, and I bet you do this too. I educate my buyers.
Hmm.
If they're looking at Wizard of Oz books for the first time with me, my conversation always goes to, you can buy Oz books in a lot of places, but here's what you need to know if you're not buying from me. If you go to somebody and they say they have a first edition Wizard of Oz book, the
Hmm.
only question you have to ask is, do you have Oziana? And if you get a blank stare, you probably should turn around and walk away because
Yeah.
they don't know what they're doing. Because I can't do Oz books without Oziana. And if I can't do it without
Right.
Oziana, nobody
Yeah.
else is
It,
doing
it actually goes deeper than that. I think if you have a display of Oz books, most young people are shocked who've seen The Wizard of Oz that think that it's only one book.
it. Yeah, exactly.
And
It,
you and I both know those covers are amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just, matter of fact, the week before Brimfield, I bought 20 Oz books from a
Okay.
dealer.
Yeah.
Okay, from a dealer, and he said to me when I saw, I went to the shop. I hadn't been there in 25 years. And I went to the shop, and he says to me, I saw Oziana on a table, and on top of a couple Oz books. And he says, is the reference book? I say, oh no, I need that. And he points to a shelf, and there's 20 Oz books on the shelf. He says, I bought these 25 years ago, and I'm still trying to figure them
Wow.
out.
Wow. Wow.
So I looked I looked at him. We talked a little bit more, and he wasn't sure he wanted to sell them. And then we talked some more, and he says, "Well, I probably should. If I haven't done this in 25 years," he says, "I should probably get rid of them. What do you offer?" I offered him a number. He came back at me. We settled on another number, and everybody's happy.
Well, and this brings us full circle because we began the interview today with talking about collectors and dealers and letting go. So he finally learned to let go of those Oz books, and you got him
and,
there.
and
So
I got
interesting.
them.
Yeah. All
Yeah,
right. So, yeah. Go ahead.
no, this is the business. I mean, and I know this just knowing you briefly. I know that you have the passion for the business,
I
for the
love it.
book. You know, I saw your interview with Ken Sanders,
Oh,
and a
yes.
guy I've known Ken since the '90s.
Hmm.
Love the guy, great man. Um, he's a giant in the business, to be truthful, and he's also a big guy, and but a sweetheart. I mean, real sweetheart of a gentleman, and he's an example of it's not about the. I mean, his words were, "It's not about the money for me."
Right. Yeah.
And I feel the exact. Listen, I could have been maybe a millionaire if
Hmm.
I'd done what Roland told me to do,
Right.
but would I have been happy? And that's really the key ingredient. And this goes back to my birthing story. When I first got into the business, you need to write a business plan. So I went, SCORE is a group of retired business people, and they'll give you business advice. So I went to SCORE, and they let me sit down with a gentleman who had retired from some big corporation, and we talked and talked and talked, and we talked about the business plan and da 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 da. And smart guy, and successful guy. But when I left, I said to myself, I could write a business plan. It's not that hard to do. I
Yeah.
said, and after I write it, I may not even read it again. I'm going to put it on the shelf and I'm never going to look at it again. I said, that's not a good business plan.
Right.
So I said to myself, I need a business plan that I can remember. And I thought and thought about it and I boiled it down to two words: be.
Yeah. Yeah, vitally words that live by, be happy. I think in my Patreon group we have just about 150 members, and everybody loves what they do. They love learning, they love sourcing, and they love selling. So I think, like you, I'm just as positive as you are about the future of the book business. I think it's a very exciting time to be a bookseller, and I think that we're all in for a gold rush in the near future.
I think
One,
that
yeah, the platform.
things
Yeah.
things are changing. We you and I talked earlier about what's not,
Yeah.
and there's
Whatnot.
pluses and I know there's pluses and minuses to it,
Mhm.
just like there was with eBay. There's pluses and
Right.
minuses.
Yeah. Every platform has pluses and
Yeah,
minuses,
and
but to be able to broaden the platforms throughout not just the country, but all the countries on the globe, it's just an amazing thing to be able to do, to sell
yeah,
books internationally.
yeah,
Just
it is. And now here's the irony: I didn't sell online, but back in the '90s, I forget how it came about, but I sold a box of books to somebody. I think it was in Germany or Denmark or someplace in the Slavic area. Um, I had to do what they call it, the mail bag. They had, I forget what
yeah. Oh yes, yes.
yeah, they had to do, so I learned about international shipping, and then I guess they don't do that anymore, but
It's a lot easier now, and especially with
yeah,
companies like platforms like eBay, the international, they have their own international hub. The label comes right
yeah,
out of the printer. You stick it on the box,
yeah,
and it makes for a beautiful process.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I literally have sold books around the world, even though I don't sell online.
Well, there's still hope for you. I'm going to work
Yeah.
on you a little bit. So I've taken up some time for you today. Let me ask you my famous last question of the interview.
It's how much you going to pay me for this?
It's how
No.
much I'm
Oh.
going to pay you, of course. The name of the show is Destination Unknown. You are number 16 of booksellers I've been to. Who are you sending me off to number 17?
Well, I want to send you to my friend in Denver.
Okay.
I've known her for 30 years.
Okay.
She's one of the truthfully, she's one of the great booksellers in the country. She runs a little store. She sold her first store in the '90s. She was a member of the original Cavs faculty.
Okay.
going in Colorado. It used to actually be in Denver, then moved to Colorado Springs. Now it's in Minnesota. Except I found out today she was running to catch a train to go to Denali. Is that where she was going? I don't even
Mhm.
know where she is in the world. So she's off traveling, but when she comes back, I'm going to put you in touch with her.
Okay.
She has a great store called Westside Books on
Beautiful.
32nd Street in Denver. She's she I shouldn't say it this way, but she really is the grande dame of Denver now.
Awesome. And what is her name?
Her name is Lois Harvey,
Beautiful.
and
Okay.
pretty much if you haven't visited her store in Denver, you haven't been book shopping.
You got it. So I'm not only will I interview her, but eventually I'll get over to her store. Yeah. So thank you very much for your time today. It is a true honor and a true pleasure to talk books with
Oh,
you. And I'm excited to meet you down here in St. Petersburg next year at the book fair.
we're going to get you to St. Petersburg because
You're gonna get me there.
and I'm in booth number one,
Right.
and
I
I've been
can't
there.
miss you. I
You
can't miss
can't miss.
you.
I'm in booth number one,
Right.
and I do want to give them a plug. That is one of the best shows in the country.
Beautiful.
Sarah Sarah runs it. Her dad started it.
Hmm.
It runs like a clock down there. It's smooth, and they get anywhere from 80 to 100 dealers. Um, the floor is it's one of the great halls to do a book show in. It's an old dance hall with the alcoves. It's beautifully decorated. I love the building, um, and they're getting 2,500 people still showing up.
Right.
They never had that big dip that most every other show had. They had a dip, but it wasn't a big dip. And
Right.
that's where I started 10 years ago. I started seeing young people showing up.
Yeah, yeah, and I've seen them advertise on Instagram. They do a good job advertising, getting their name out there. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely see you at booth one. Don't worry about
Okay.
that. I'll see you. And again, thank you for your time. Have a great weekend. I know I'm going to talk to you
Hey,
soon.
great. It was wonderful. Looking forward to being more in touch more.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.